and welcome to an evening of frank conversation here on Hard Copy, coming to you from our studios in Abuja. I'm Maokpe Ogun Yusuf. Wow, what a day it's been at the Supreme Court of Nigeria, where a significant number of governors knew their fate today. Lawyers and lawmakers will certainly eagerly await certified true copies of judgments to know really how the lordships reach their decisions, and hopefully there'll be no controversy around that. And perhaps what other amendments need to be canvassed in any rewriting of our Electoral Act. But that's not the topic of our discussion today. We're focusing on the controversy now known as Eduegate. Monday this week saw the president suspend his Minister of Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Alleviation, Dr. Betta Edu, over an alleged misappropriation of the sum of 585 million naira. Now, before this controversy got to a head, the president had removed from office a certain Ms. Halima Shehu over an alleged embezzlement of 44.8 billion naira. Ms. Shehu was the national coordinator of the National Investment Program, the NSIP. Now, questions around these social investment programs have also seen the pioneer minister in the ministry, Ms. Sadiya Umar Farouk, answer questions at the offices of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. All of this happening within 2 weeks. Now, for many Nigerians, it raises deeper questions about processes and procedures within the country's many ministries, departments, and agencies. Tonight, I have with me someone who can shed light on what precisely is wrong and perhaps what needs to happen to prevent huge sums like this from being misappropriated or embezzled. Dr. Adegoroye is the Pioneer Director General in the Bureau of Public Service Reforms and has served as Permanent Secretary in a number of ministries. Thank you, Dr. Adegoroye, for coming on Hard Copy.
Glad to be with you, but a little bit sad that this is the topic we are discussing.
It is disheartening indeed, but I mean, it is what it is. It is what it is. It is the reason why the Bureau of Public Service Reforms must have been formed in the first instance. The fact that we know that our civil service needs reforming, and this kinds of leakages ought not to be. It's the reason why we have rules.
Sure.
So I'm wondering, as somebody who has served in that ministry, in that agency of government, which had high hopes for the reformation of our ministries, departments, and agencies, and knowing that this is a baby ministry, this Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Alleviation is not even yet 8 years old, and this is the kind of scandal we're already beginning to see. How is it coming to you?
Very sad, and sad indeed, because it is because of my own pedigree and the fact that I was Director General of the Bureau of Public Service Reforms that still kept me on to advocate integrity in public service, such that I'm now in my 14th year of retirement. I'm still constantly writing journey issues when things are wrong, writing to the right authorities about how things should be done, seizing every platform to speak to the authority by speaking truth to power as to how things should be done. As you saw during the Independence Day, when I was more or less even giving prescriptives as what should be done. And that was being done because I had anticipated that just before the commencement, or at the commencement within the first 1 week, we will have been conducting what we call induction programs. It took so long to do that.
Induction programs for who?
Induction programs within the presidency, then induction programs for the cabinet when it is formed. When this eventually took place, it was months after they had come in, and certain practices that may be alien may already be creeping into the system. And in the case of what you are talking about, of course there are procedures. There are accounts procedures, there are procurement guidelines, all of those things are there, and they should have been taken through that in a way that will be able to instill some fear into them. But more importantly, exactly in line with what I said during the Independence Day lecture, that the youthful ministers should realize that some of these public servants, directors and permanent secretaries, are in the 35th year of service, being almost close to their own age. And therefore, it would be very, very instructive for them to listen to them rather than to exhibit traits that will make them show as if they know all. Because what public servants will then do is that in some cases, they just watch, and then you can easily get into the problem, like what has happened.
Well, you've spoken about the need for an induction. Some people will say, but we have the ministerial retreat. Isn't that what it's supposed to help do? Isn't that an induction of sorts?
You had a retreat. When did we have the retreat? How many weeks after? When Obasanjo was doing his own, he did his own even before those ministers were announced. He had already had an assemblage of certain people that he would want in his cabinet, and he was organizing a retreat for them within the first 1 week. And from the retreat, was beginning to tease out those who should come in, those who should not come in. In this case, we need to really appreciate the challenge of the President Tinubu administration. The challenge are in several ways. First, I call it the challenge of transition, which in 2007, I made presentation to President Yaradua to tell him that because you are coming in and meeting residual actors of the outgone administration, you are not likely to get the real true facts because they're going to be presenting from their own viewpoint with biases introducing, and that it may be taking about 6 months to 18 months before they can get the true picture of things. In the other case of President Tinubu we're talking about, remember, he ceased being governor about 16 years out. So, having ceased being governor, he has assumed a different role, a role of a leader, political leader, the Jagaban, the Ashiwaju, the whatever. So, to some extent, the capacity to be doing rigorous scrutiny of documents has been reduced, while the capacity to assemble people behind the man of the people grew. So that was a challenge. So he too will have to rely on certain people who are close to him. And we need to also ensure that at this period of that coming in, those people are also jostling for their own strategic positions. So we really don't know how these things were going on. So these were some of the challenges that were on ground. And in such a way that by the time you are now bringing these people in and you announce them as ministers and tell them to go and take over, and they took over, the zeal to perform began to make them not even listen so much to the people they met on ground. And I wish that some of the humility may have been there. You saw some of the letters that came in the social media, including the one signed by this minister, where he's writing that he's directing himself. I'm directed, and he's the one signing. Somebody will be able to put some of these things together. But be that as it may, the lapses that are there is what has brought us to where we are now. So
in your own experience, do you think that civil service rules need to be reviewed every now and again, especially in a ministry like poverty, alleviation, and humanitarian affairs, where sometimes help might be needed more quickly than government might be moving?
Not really. In this particular case, what is the urgency? When you have urgency, you have agency like NEMA that's actually attuned to responding to emergency in a way that the other back agencies can now come in. And in respect of what actually came out, what is the urgency in that civil service rule will have blocked? There is no civil service rule right now in terms of financial regulations, in terms of even procurement, that is so stultifying as to make somebody commit what has happened. What has happened is a totally different thing.
Yeah, because what we're hearing...
It's an attitudinal issue.
What we're hearing is about program officers being appointed within certain departments and ministries and agencies, that almost it's a culture now within ministries, departments and agencies that they will have a programs officer and sums of money can be paid into that person's personal account. It could be for any number of issues. They say, oh, when you have conferences, for instance, these kinds of things can happen. I don't know. Is this something that is allowed within public service rules?
I think this is an aberration. That when you have programs do have their program accounts, and you pay to those accounts. And the idea, and when you really know the public service that we know, the ones that we were operating, even says that on no account can you have interest or money paid to your account that's more than 3 times your salary. So that's actually a guiding one. I think where this thing came in is that not just that you have program officers, that you now have what they call account officers to help you. Over the years, the account officer was supposed to guide to ensure that money is actually being paid properly. But unfortunately, in some instances, you do find the so-called account officer who's supposed to guide rightly is a euphemism for somebody who will help you clean it up, like an auditor, an expert contract auditor, who will help you ensure that by the time the program is finished and all the money has been disbursed, appropriately and inappropriately, the books will be clean, and therefore you will not have any kind of query. So it is this new, shall I say, something venom that's entering the service that's actually bad. Otherwise, the idea of account officer, the idea of program officer, they are quite excellent. Is to ensure that programs are run properly.
Some people think that this is smaller than even a tip of the iceberg. Looking at the amounts that we're even looking at, they think that if you go to all the how many ministries, departments, and agencies, the amounts that you might be talking about will be mind-boggling. Who do you think should be in charge of? Because I don't know whether they should start the cleaning of the origin stables, as they say, but if such a thing were to happen, if we're to say, okay, we're doing an audit, where do you think it should start from, and who should bear responsibility for it if the executive were to take it on?
I have said several times that what the executive needs to do is to open up and appoint people of integrity. But the challenge that we've had is that in a situation where politics is meeting governance, some interests in politics are actually focusing on how to be able to get funds, how to be able to benefit themselves. And that is why they put pressure on the system to ensure that their people are posted to that certain ministries. The pressures are put on those who deploy, like a head of service, for example. And of course, the head of service will also have his or her own interest. And then you are now deploying to those places. That's why those kind of challenges are. But at the same time, there are also public servants who are actually honest enough and do not want trouble and don't even want to be posted to areas where you are disbursing money or where you have contracts because the pressure is so much. I am one of those, and I know a few others, even in the current system, that are like that. The question that we need to ask is this. I had an opportunity one time, over 10 years ago now, in Osun State, to help the governor to overhaul the entire permanent secretary cadre. 26 of them. And after we overhauled them, he wanted me to help select the head of service. And he said he wanted what he called a democratic position, whereby we will ask people to vote for who they wanted. And I refused. I said, no, you don't do that. In public service, he said that's what he wanted. He said I should just parade the officers among, the management level. Okay? And two things happened. I said, no, we're not going to do that. I'm going to use my method, and I can use your method, and then we'll see whether the two methods meet. In my method, I set out to ask about 20 character trait questions. Apart from competence and so on from people, I now started asking questions like corruption perception of each of the officers. Do they have companies, personal companies? Do you know whether they've used their personal companies to get businesses from government? What is their lifestyle? So I told each of the permanent secretaries to take themselves out of the position and judge the others on the basis of those. And when the things came out, we got the top 3, which we were using. In the meantime, we did the parade that the governor said we should do. The ones that were hailed were not in that top 3. In fact, one of the ones that was hailed most was the one that actually had some integrity issue, who has been caught stealing in an earlier cadre. So, in other words, what I'm trying to tell you is that it's not a popularity contest, but the civil servants themselves know those who are corrupt, and they can be able to vouch for those who have integrity. If only government will be strong enough to be able to adopt some of this, you'll be shocked what will come out.
What are some of the reforms that you've tried to implement when you were DJ as BPSR that were stiffly resisted?
In fact, remember that we started in 2003, 2004. Virtually, many things were resisted, even with that cost. And we had to find ways to get them to imbibe it.
Dr. Adegoroye, I'm just looking at, I'm looking further at what needs to be done. Because yes, the current minister who's been suspended, the past minister who was the pioneer minister of that ministry, they're both answering questions at the EFCC as well as the coordinator of the NSIP. And they're all innocent until proven guilty. But what do you think needs to be done to strengthen accountability? Because at the end of the day, much as we're talking about processes and what have you, this is a key ministry that is supposed to be about the welfare of Nigerians. Huge sums of monies are usually voted, even though they come with some controversy at the National Assembly. But they've made a very strong case that this is about uplifting people from poverty. If you're going to be, distributing huge sums of money to people, how can we put in place a process that actually ensures that it is those who truly need it who are getting it in a way that is fair and transparent?
I'm not so sure whether the process is actually the problem. The process of taking the money out or the process of getting sure the money gets to those that should get to, those are pretty straightforward if we really put our hearts to it. And if we want to do it. Where the problem lies is the notion that you working in those places, you need to answer to certain people. You need to answer to certain things. Then you know that some people even think that maybe the fund we need for some of our campaign may come from there. Maybe even those who have the oversight, who are there, the pressures they're going to put on you will be so unimaginable. They'll be making demands that are out of the world and looking for excuses of either retreat or travel out to be able to get the money out. So this is where these things come in. And when you are not actually giving in, then you are being tagged not a team player. It's so unfortunate what is going on behind the scene, such that a lot of accounting officers actually would prefer not to be put where there are pressures for those things. So it's not so much of the controls, because at no time do we have new administration, and even on a regular basis, that the Bureau of Public Procurement hold, sessions for them, training sessions. They do it so regularly and giving a lot of their books and their publications. But the issue is totally different.
This is not the only issue that came up this week. Also this week, we see that the president is trying to, show some steps in cutting the cost of governance. He talked about his aide, the chief spokesperson of the government, came out to talk about how the president intends to cut down the number of people who go with him in the country and outside of the country. Not just him, his vice president, his wife, and the wife of the vice president as well, and also for ministers and heads of agencies as well. For a number of people, again, this was released to mixed feelings. Those who thought, oh, this is a great way to go, but there are those who say, no, it's not as simple as it looks. We've heard this before. We need to be sure that, this instruction is very clear. Does it include his advanced team? Does it include only those who are going with him? Does it include his security personnel, for instance? And there are those who say, no, it's not even about any of those things. It's about the cost. It's about the bottom line. How is he going to ensure that he's showing us that this policy change which he is ordering is also going to reflect at the end of the day on the bottom line? How are you looking at this?
First, like any other Nigerian, I will commend the president for at least being responsive. We've had situations where we had to even be begging and waiting. And I remember at one point I said, we elect a president, not a Kabiyesi. So that is right. But as I also said, the guidelines are there.
Oh, there are guidelines?
There are guidelines. Number one, guidelines about participation in conferences, international conferences, what needs to be done, what needs to be done after, have been there since early 90s. And I gave an example recently, too, of the guidelines since this Fourth Republic. I was one of those that brought one out in 2001, even when the SGF was out of the country. And it was only a permanent secretary of GSO who was holding out. And because I got a report from the United Nations, from the deputy permanent representative, my friend Ambassador Shegun Akwata, of an embarrassing situation where Nigeria was to attend in observer status, where they were expecting 2 people, and they ended up having almost 100.
100 people?
Yeah. So he sent to me because I was with the SGF as the head think tank and director of special duties. I took it to the attention of Permanent Secretary David Oyegu and called my friend Hakim, because as Permanent Secretary Political, a department under him also handles international issues as part of the put to be representative. So, and right there and then, without waiting for the SGF, we did a draft for the president, and which Oyegu passed as the person covering the schedule of duty. And President Obasanjo approved immediately, and it led to certain circulars. So the point I'm trying to say is that it is incumbent on each one of us, even when we see things that are going wrong, to be responsive and ensure that these things should be done. So the key issues here is that we really need to x-ray the center of government. You know, the center of government, the fulcrum, which is the office of the SGF. Regularly, they need to be reminding people of these kind of things. But of course, too, the ministers should also give due respect to that office and allow the coordination that should be done by that office to be as effective as possible. Because when you bypass that office and you try to get things to the villa through some other channel, and that office doesn't know, it becomes so difficult for that office to also be able to respond. So these are the issues.
You spoke of a guideline. Is the president's policy directive within the guidelines which you say exist?
Oh, what the president has done is within the guideline. In this case, he's putting his own weight to say that if I'm traveling, if I'm not taking more than this number, there should be no basis for any minister, traveling and taking so many numbers. But where this thing comes in is because we see this as not just ego boosting. We also see it as some way, especially now that the Naira has a poor value, a way to be able to get more money.
How do you think that the president's team can ensure that they are able to show at the end of the day how this affects the bottom line? Because for a number of Nigerians, that is at the heart of the matter.
The bottom line, meaning what will go to Nigeria. The first thing is to even sit down, even rationalize how many of these meetings do we really want to go? How many should we go at the level of head of government? How many should we go at a lower level? So that will be able to reduce the number, and also not just the number, but also the amount of money that will go into that. Secondly, the office of the SGF, not necessarily the office, you know that Adiza Bala Usman is now coordinator of policy coordination and things like that. That office also has a unit of monitoring and evaluation. They should be able to say. But the question that I have is that what does the rule say right now about the number? How does this new directives of the president fit into that number? Did we make budget this year on the basis of those numbers? Because part of the problem that you have in government is that you have multiple sources funding the same thing. You say you want to go to a conference on, call it aviation or any other thing. Many times you find that the minister is being funded by 3 or 4 agencies. So double, triple dipping all over the area. So I identify some of this in my book. And you need to find out who is actually monitoring to know how all these funds are coming in. Whereas when the minister is traveling, the budget of the minister is in the main ministry. There should be no other person funding. But you find a situation where you say, okay, my SA want to go with me. Help me fund it. This agency fund it. Agency C, my wife want to go with me. You fund it. That agency, when they are doing it, they put the name of the minister and virtually every other person there. So you are finding that what should cost you maybe 10 million is probably costing 40 million at the end of the day. Travel. These are the things you can verify. This is one of the reasons why some years ago, when Oronsaye was there, he was trying to introduce what they call the travel desk, so that there will be a desk that will be monitoring who is traveling, That desk is from where you are going to get your ticket. It will be according to the rules. That ticket, that desk will be able to also say what your extra code will be, so that at the end of the day, government is able to monitor. But then they fought him to a standstill.
So many things to look at. Very little time to look at them, Dr. Adegoroye. But I do believe that perhaps we'll catch up with you again sometime in the year as we see some of these matters progress. Dr. Adegoroye, Pioneer Director General in the Bureau of Public Service Reforms, thank you for coming on Hard Copy. Thank
you for having me.
Well, that's the program tonight. Your feedback will certainly be very welcome to the handles showing on your screen. Thank you for watching. I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf. Good night.